When Emma Walker walked out of Miller's Feed and Seed with 6 cardboard boxes full of old coffee cans, Ray Pritchard stopped loading fence wire into his truck and stared at her like she had come out carrying snakes. The morning was cold for April, with low gray clouds pressing down over the little Missouri town and dust already lifting from the road whenever a truck passed. Emma was 18, narrow-shouldered, sun-browned, and quiet in a way that made grown men think she had nothing to say. Her father's faded seed cap sat low over her eyes. Her boots were muddy at the heels. Her hands were wrapped around the first box like it weighed more than feed. Ray squinted at the cans. "What you got in there, Emma?" She did not answer right away. She set the box in the bed of her father's old Ford, then went back for another. Cal Miller, the feed store owner, stepped into the loading doorway with a receipt in his hand and a look on his face like he wished the whole transaction had happened after closing. "Worms," he said. Ray turned slowly. "Worms?" Cal rubbed his jaw. "About 1,000 of them." By then, Doyle Haskins had come out from inside the store with a paper cup of coffee. Doyle owned 300 acres north of town and liked to remind people that he had been farming before most of them were born. He looked from Emma to the boxes, then down the road toward the Walker place. "You buying bait now?" Doyle asked. "Fishing might pay better than those tomatoes did last year." A couple of men laughed. Emma lifted another box into the truck. Ray walked closer, leaned over the tailgate, and saw the dark soil packed inside the cans. Something thin and red twisted near the surface. "You spent money on worms?" he said. "Emma, you got a banknote breathing down your neck, a tractor that won't run, and a greenhouse held together with prayer. You sure this is what your daddy would have done?" That made her hands tighten on the cardboard. For 1 second, she looked at him. Her eyes were tired, but not empty. Then she pushed the box farther into the truck bed and said, "No, sir." Ray blinked. Emma tied the tarp down over the cans. "He would have bought more," she said. No one laughed at first. They were too surprised she had answered at all. Then Doyle snorted into his coffee. "Well," he said, turning away, "by July, she'll either have tomatoes or the best-fed worms in Cedar County." Emma climbed into the Ford. The starter clicked twice before the engine caught. She pulled out slow, with the boxes rattling under the tarp, and drove east past the diner, the bank, the gas station, and the people who had already decided what kind of story she was going to become. The Walker farm sat 4 miles outside town, beyond a gravel turnoff and a line of tired sycamores. Once, there had been a painted sign by the road that said, "Walker Family Tomatoes," in red letters. Now the paint was peeling so badly that only Walk and Tom could still be read from a passing truck. The farm was 38 acres, though only 9 of them had made money in recent years. The rest was pasture gone thin, a low field too wet in spring, and a backslope that baked hard in summer. The barn leaned east. The chicken house had a roof patched with license plates. The greenhouse behind the house had cracked panels, torn plastic, and a door that banged open whenever the wind came out of the west. Emma parked beside it and sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. Through the kitchen window, she could see her father watching. Tom Walker had once been the kind of man who could carry 2 bushel crates at a time, fix a carburetor by sound, and tell rain by the smell of a fence post. The stroke had not taken his mind, but it had taken the left side of his body and half the strength from his voice. He moved with a cane now. Some mornings, getting from the bedroom to the kitchen took him longer than milking used to. Emma unloaded the first box and carried it to the tomato ground. The soil was pale and tight, more gray than brown. Last year's plants had died there in uneven rows, their roots shallow, their fruit small and split. The field still looked embarrassed by it. She knelt and opened one of the cans. The worms moved in the damp dark. Behind her, the porch door creaked. Her father stood there with one hand on the rail, breathing hard from the short walk. His plaid shirt hung loose on him, his left hand curled against his chest. "You really got them," he said. Emma nodded. Tom looked past her to the field. For a while, the only sound was the wind ticking loose plastic against the greenhouse frame. Your granddad used to keep coffee cans under the sink, he said. Your grandma hated it. Emma smiled faintly. I read that. You read all of it? Most. Tom lowered himself into the porch chair with effort. His mouth pulled slightly to one side when he was tired, and he hated when Emma noticed. Book makes it sound easy, he said. I know. It wasn't. I know. No, Em. His voice sharpened, not in anger, but in fear. You don't know. That ground's been pushed too hard. I pushed it too hard. Your granddad built soil for 40 years, and I spent 20 trying to outrun bills with fertilizer and diesel. Emma looked down at the open can. Her father swallowed. I'm not saying don't try, he said. I'm saying don't think the land owes us a miracle. She carried the can to the first trench she had dug the night before. It was lined with wet leaves, old straw, coffee grounds from the diner, crushed eggshells, and composted chicken manure from the abandoned coop. I'm not asking it for one, she said. I'm feeding it. Tom looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, small and slow. Don't put them too shallow, he said. He'll cook 'em. That was the closest thing to blessing he could give. By noon, trucks had begun slowing along the road. Emma could feel eyes on her back as she worked. She tipped the worms into the trenches, covered them with damp compost, then pulled straw over the rows thick enough to shade the earth. She worked without music, without stopping to answer, without looking up when Doyle Haskins drove by twice in the same hour. At the diner that afternoon, her name came up before the meatloaf special. Ray Pritchard sat at the counter with Doyle, Cal Miller, and Nancy Bell from First County Bank. Nancy was not a banker by title, not the one who signed papers, but she had worked behind that front desk for 22 years and knew every family's money trouble before most families admitted it. She came in last week asking about an extension, Nancy said, stirring sweetener into her tea. Then today she's buying worms. Doyle shook his head. Tom Walker would have known better. Cal did not answer. Ray leaned back on the stool. Tom ain't the one running it now. Nancy's voice softened, but not enough to become kind. That's what worries me. She's just a girl. Across the room, Emma stood at the register holding 2 5-gallon buckets the waitress had filled with coffee grounds. She had come in through the side door and heard enough. The room changed when they noticed her. Doyle cleared his throat, but he did not apologize. Emma paid for a biscuit she barely had the stomach to eat. The waitress, Lila, pushed the buckets toward her. My mama used coffee grounds on roses, Lila said quietly. Emma looked up. Tomatoes ain't roses, Doyle called from the counter. Lila did not look at him. No, they're harder. Emma carried the buckets out. That evening, she worked until the sky went purple and the first bats crossed above the barn. Her father sat on the porch with a blanket over his knees, pretending to read the newspaper but watching the rows instead. The first 2 weeks punished her confidence. One bed stayed too wet because she had laid the straw too thick, and the old drip line leaked at a coupling. The seedlings in that row wilted yellow by morning. Emma dug around the roots and found the soil sour-smelling and cold. She pulled back the straw, cut the water, and stood there with mud on her hands, feeling foolish enough to hear Doyle's laughter, though he was nowhere nearby. 3 days later, mice found the mulch and tore little paths through 2 rows. They chewed 6 young plants clean at the stem. Emma set traps along the greenhouse wall and stayed up past midnight with a flashlight, listening to rustles in the straw. Then the pump failed. It happened at 5:18 on a Tuesday morning. Emma knew the time because she had just written the temperature in her notebook when the water pressure coughed once, spat air, and died. She ran to the shed and found the pump motor humming hot but not pulling. By sunrise, she had grease up both arms. By 9, she had the pump apart on the concrete floor, pieces laid out around her like bones. Her father tried to come help. She heard his cane strike the porch steps and turned sharply. Dad, don't. I can hold a wrench. You can barely stand on that step. His face hardened. For a moment, he looked like the old Tom Walker, the man who hated weakness more than drought. Emma softened her voice. Tell me what I'm looking at. He stood breathing through his nose, Angry at his body, angry at the pump, angry at the fact that his daughter had to ask instead of him simply doing it. "Impeller," he said finally. "Check if it's cracked." She brought the part to him. He held it in his good hand, turned it against the light, and pointed with his thumb. "There, hairline split." Emma closed her eyes. "Can we fix it?" "For today?" he said. "Maybe. For the season?" "No. A new pump cost more than she had. A used part might be found in Springfield, but fuel to get there was not free either." She called 3 salvage yards. One had the wrong size. One never called back. One had the part but wanted cash. Emma counted the money in the coffee can above the refrigerator and found $43 less than she needed. That afternoon, she drove to Ray Pritchard's farm. Ray came out of the machine shed wiping his hands on a rag. Behind him, his fields lay clean and straight, each row bare as a ruler line. "I need a pump impeller," Emma said. Ray lifted his eyebrows. "Thought worms didn't need much water." She took the remark without blinking. "Tom said you might have parts from the old Gould pump." Ray looked toward his shed. "Might. I can pay after market." He laughed once. "That's what everybody says before market." Emma stood there, jaw set. Ray looked at her truck, at the cracked windshield, at the empty passenger seat. Something in his face shifted, but not far enough to become kindness. "I'll sell it for 30. I've got 12. Then you've got $12 worth of problem." Emma turned to leave. Ray sighed. "Hold on." He disappeared into the shed and came back with a dusty part in his hand. "You get 1 week," he said. "If those tomatoes die, I want my part back before the bank gets the place." Emma took it. "Thank you." Ray grunted. "Don't make me regret being soft." She drove home and installed the part with her father, talking her through every step from a chair in the shade. When the pump finally coughed water back into the line, Emma laughed before she could stop herself. It came out broken and surprised. Her father smiled at the sound. Not big, not long, but enough. By June, the plants had begun to take hold. Not all of them. Emma lost nearly a fifth of the first planting to stress, mice, weak transplants, and her own mistakes. The rows did not look perfect. Some plants were shorter, some leaves curled. One section near the greenhouse door stayed uneven no matter what she changed. But beneath the straw, the soil was different. When she pushed her fingers down, the ground was cooler. It no longer sealed into a hard crust after watering. Worm castings appeared in small dark grains near the stems. The leaves on the healthier plants deepened from tired green to a color that looked almost blue in the evening shade. Emma wrote everything down. June 4th, row 3 holding moisture better than row 1. June 7th, worms active under straw after light irrigation. June 12th, blossoms set stronger in beds with more leaf mold. June 15th, need shade cloth before real heat. Real heat came early. The rain stopped just after Father's Day. At first no one worried much. Dry spells were part of farming. Then a week passed, then 2. The sky turned white and blank. Wind moved across the county like air from an oven. Ditches emptied. Pastures dulled at the roots. The pond behind the Walker barn shrank every day until a ring of black mud marked where water had been. At the diner, the jokes about Emma changed. No one said much about worms anymore. They were too busy watching their own fields curl. Doyle Haskins still talked. "Mulch holds mice and fungus," he told anyone who would listen. "Bare ground dries faster after watering. Always has." Cal Miller, who had sold him 3 pallets of fertilizer that spring, said nothing. By the 3rd week without rain, Emma's pump began overheating if she ran it more than 20 minutes at a time. She started watering in sections before dawn and after sunset, timing each row with a kitchen timer clipped to her belt. She carried buckets to the greenhouse beds when the pressure dropped. Sweat ran down her back before breakfast. Her hands cramped at night. One afternoon, she found row 6 wilting badly. She pulled back the straw and saw that the drip line had clogged with grit. The soil around the roots was dry 3 inches down. The plants hung limp, blossoms already dropping. "No," she whispered. She worked the line loose, flushed it, unclogged each emitter with a sewing needle, and watered the row by hand until dark. The next morning, half the plants had lifted, the other half had not. She cut the dead ones out herself. Her father watched from the edge of the field, leaning hard on his cane. "I lost the north greenhouse in '98, he said. "Emma kept cutting. Thought I could save all of it. Burned myself out trying." She tossed a dead plant into the wheelbarrow. "I don't want to hear a lesson right now. I know what you're doing." "No," Tom said, "you don't." His voice was thin, but steady enough that she turned. He pointed at the row. "I'm telling you, choose what lives. Farming ain't saving every plant. It's saving enough to keep going." Emma looked down the field. Some rows were strong, some were fighting, some were already lost. That night, she rewrote her watering plan. She stopped trying to rescue the weakest section and gave that water to the rows with deeper roots. It felt cruel. It also worked. On the 31st day without rain, Nancy Bell came out from the bank with Mr. Whitcomb, the loan officer. Emma saw their car from the greenhouse and wiped her hands on her jeans. Her father came to the porch, slower than usual. Mr. Whitcomb wore polished shoes that collected dust before he made it halfway to the house. He looked uncomfortable among the tools, hoses, crates, and buckets. "Emma," he said, "we're not here to scare you." That was how she knew he was. Nancy held a folder against her chest. She would not quite meet Emma's eyes. Mr. Whitcomb continued, "The bank needs to see meaningful payment after harvest. If that can't happen, we'll have to discuss other remedies." Her father's good hand tightened on the porch rail. Emma said, "How much time?" "End of August." The heat hummed around them. Mr. Whitcomb glanced toward the tomato field. "I understand you're trying something unconventional." Doyle Haskins's truck slowed on the road at that exact moment, as if the whole county had rehearsed the humiliation. Emma felt her face burn. Mr. Whitcomb lowered his voice. "There are still buyers interested in the acreage. Selling voluntarily would give you more control than foreclosure." Her father shifted forward. "No," Tom said. It came out rough, but clear. Everyone looked at him. Tom swallowed, then forced the next words through the damage the stroke had left behind. "My father broke that ground. I nearly wore it out. She's trying to heal it. You want your money? Fine. But don't stand in my yard and call surrender control." Nancy looked down at the folder. Mr. Whitcomb adjusted his tie, though no wind had touched it. Emma had not heard her father speak that many words at once in months. After they left, she stood beside him on the porch. "You shouldn't have pushed yourself," she said. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were bright. "You're not the only stubborn walker." The drought lasted 47 days. By the end of it, the county looked bruised. Corn leaves rolled tight. Soybean fields stayed short. Tomato vines in exposed rows across the area burned along the edges, dropped blossoms, and set smaller fruit. Some farms still had decent patches where irrigation held, and some larger growers managed by spending money Emma did not have. But many smaller fields suffered badly. Emma's field suffered too. The story was not that her tomatoes were untouched. They were not. She lost the weak section near the greenhouse door. Sun-scald marked fruit along the west row where the shade cloth tore in a windstorm. Some plants stopped setting blossoms for 10 days. The old pump limped through each morning like an animal that wanted to lie down. But the best rows held. Under the straw, the soil stayed cool enough to matter. The worm-worked beds accepted water instead of shedding it. Organic matter held moisture a little longer. Roots had pushed deeper than the year before. The difference was not magic. It was inches. It was hours. It was enough. On the 48th day, clouds finally rose in the west. The first rain came hard and fast, the kind that usually split tomatoes and washed loose soil toward the road ditch. Emma stood in the greenhouse doorway, watching water pour off the roof and run between the rows. Her heart beat in her throat. By morning, the damage reports moved through town. Several growers lost fruit to cracking after the sudden rain. Bare rows crusted, then puddled. Doyle's earliest tomato patch split badly along the low end. Ray Pritchard lost enough that he drove past Emma's place twice without slowing. Emma walked her rows with dread in her stomach. There was damage. She found split fruit and filled 2 buckets with losses. A lower bed had standing water at the end, but most of the fruit held. The mulch softened the blow of the rain. The soil drank instead of sealing. The tomatoes that had ripened slower through the drought were firm enough to survive the sudden change. She sat down in the mud between rows 3 and 4 and cried so quietly that no one from the road could have heard. Harvest began 5 days later. Emma picked before sunrise with a headlamp and again after supper when the air cooled. Her father sat at a folding table in the shade and sorted tomatoes with one good hand, turning each fruit carefully, setting cracked ones aside for sauce buyers and clean ones into market crates. "You're grating too hard," Emma told him. Tom held up a tomato with a small scar near the stem. "Your granddad would haunt me if I packed this as number 1. He kept worms under the sink. I'm not scared of his ghost." Her father chuckled, and the sound seemed to surprise both of them. The first Saturday market changed everything, though not in the way stories like to pretend. Emma did not sell out in 1 hour. No television crew came. No rich buyer wrote a check big enough to erase the past. She stood under a patched canopy with sweat running down her spine, arguing prices with customers who wanted drought tomatoes at discount rates. But then people tasted them. The fruit was dense, bright, and sweet in the old Walker way, the flavor concentrated by heat but not ruined by stress. Lila from the diner bought 3 crates. A restaurant owner from the county seat bought 15 after cutting one open with a pocket knife in the parking lot. The grocery manager, who had not carried Walker tomatoes in 2 years, asked whether Emma could bring him a smaller standing order twice a week. By the end of July, the numbers began to tell the truth. Her total yield was not the biggest in the county. The larger irrigated farms still produced more overall. But per surviving row, Emma's tomatoes outperformed every Walker season since before her mother died. Her losses from cracking were lower than neighboring small growers. Her water use was lower than Ray expected when he came by, asked too many questions, and pretended not to be impressed. The county agent, Mark Ellison, came with a soil probe and a clipboard. He had visited in spring and left unconvinced. Now he crouched in row 3, pushed the probe into the bed, and lifted out a column of dark, crumbly soil, threaded with fine roots. Emma stood beside him, arms folded. Mark broke the sample apart with his thumb. "This was gray hardpan last year." "Yes, sir." "How much compost did you put down?" She handed him the notebook. He read for a long time. The field was quiet except for cicadas and the soft clack of her father sorting crates under the shade. Finally, Mark said, "This isn't a gimmick." Emma almost smiled. "No, sir." He looked embarrassed. "I might have thought it was." "You did." He closed the notebook carefully. "Would you be willing to show this to a few growers this fall?" Across the road, Doyle Haskins had stopped his truck. Emma saw him watching. "I'll show anybody who wants to learn," she said. The bank payment went in on an August morning hot enough to blur the courthouse windows. Emma walked into First County Bank, wearing clean jeans, washed hair, and the same faded cap. Her check was not enormous. It did not clear the whole debt, but it covered the overdue amount, the late interest, and enough of the operating note to move the farm out of immediate danger. Nancy Bell took the check first. She looked at the amount, then at Emma. "I heard your tomatoes did well." "They did enough." Nancy nodded, and there was something like apology in the way she slid the receipt across the counter. Mr. Whitcomb came out of his office when he heard Emma's voice. He looked at the receipt, then offered his hand. Emma shook it. "Looks like your unconventional method paid off," he said. Emma tucked the receipt into her notebook. "No," she said. "The soil did. I just stopped treating it like it was dead." For once, no one in the bank had anything clever to say. That fall, trucks began pulling up to the Walker place for a different reason. Ray came first. parking near the fence and standing awkwardly with his hands in his pockets. "I brought your pump part money," Emma said. Ray waved it off. "Keep it. I came to ask about straw." She looked at him until his ears reddened. "My Southfield crust's bad," he muttered. "Figured maybe you'd seen something." Then came Lila's brother, who wanted to rebuild raised beds behind the diner. Then 2 young growers from the next county. Then, one windy October afternoon, Doyle Haskins himself. He did not apologize. Men like Doyle rarely did in plain words. He stood at the end of row 3, scuffed the mulch with his boot, and stared at the dark soil beneath it. "My low patch split near half the fruit after that rain," he said. Emma waited. Doyle looked toward the old greenhouse, then back at the bed. "What you put under there besides worms?" Emma handed him a shovel. "You want to know," she said. "You can help turn the compost pile." For a second, Doyle looked offended. Then from the porch, Tom Walker started laughing. It was not a big laugh. His body would not allow that anymore. But it was real, and it carried across the yard like something long trapped had finally gotten loose. Doyle took the shovel. The farm was not saved forever by one season. Emma knew better than that. Winter still came with bills. The tractor still needed a starter. The barn roof still leaked over the hayloft. Some debts remained, and some years would be harder than others. But Walker Family Farm had crossed the line between ending and continuing. That mattered. On the last evening of harvest, Emma carried the empty coffee cans into the barn. She lined them on a shelf above the workbench, their labels stained and curled, their insides still dark with soil. Beside them, she placed her grandfather's notebook. Then she set her own next to it, thicker now, warped from sweat, rain, and dirty fingers. Her father stood in the doorway with his cane. "You wrote more than he did," he said. He had better handwriting. He had 2 good hands. Emma looked down at the notebooks. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sunset burned low behind the greenhouse, turning the torn plastic gold. Beyond it, the tomato rows rested under straw, not pretty, not perfect, but alive. Worms moved unseen beneath the surface, pulling last season's waste into next season's promise. The work was slow, hidden, and easy to mock until the day it fed you. Tom stepped closer and placed his good hand on the shelf. "Your granddad used to say land doesn't belong to us," he said. "We just borrow it from whoever has to fix our mistakes." Emma looked at the field. "Then I guess I've got work to do." He nodded. "So do I." By the next spring, the Walker sign by the road had been repainted. Not fancy, just whiteboards, red letters, and a smaller line beneath the family name that Emma added herself. Living Soil Tomatoes. People still slowed their trucks near the fence, but they no longer slowed to laugh at the girl with coffee cans full of worms. They slowed to look at the rows. They slowed to ask questions. And sometimes, when the wind was right, they slowed because the smell coming off that once dead field was rich, damp, and dark enough to remind them of something they had forgotten. The land had not been waiting for someone louder. It had been waiting for someone patient enough to listen.